button. And let's go over here and make sure we are coming up on the stream. Yes, yes, yes. All right. And here we are on live. Turn off my monitor volume. The tools you need to know. Okay, what's up everybody? We are gonna talk about the mixdown tools you need to know when you are working in Ableton Live. So I'm Steve Knotts, how you doing? Come on in, and what I want you to get from this video are a couple of simple ideas. Number one, you can make a world-class mix using only the native plugins in Live. The stock devices are enough to make a world-class mix. That's number one. Number two, the plugin list might look big and scary, but there are actually only a few different devices that you really need to make a mix, and the rest is like sound design, instruments, candy, that kind of stuff. But you don't have to use very many different plugins. And the other big idea is that there's actually an order of operations for using your mix tools to get to a good mix faster. So if you want a little idea of what we're doing today, take a look at the right side of my screen. You can see mix tools, and there's a little lesson plan over here because I like being organized. I like you to be organized when you're mixing. The first idea is that mix tools are for problem solving. That's pretty much what we're doing. So you don't just drop a whole bunch of plugins on a sound because you got new plugins or whatever. Only use them if you really need them. And how do you know if you need them? Well, they are used for solving problems in your sounds. Problems with frequency and tone. That's like the vibe, you know, like EQs. Dynamics and level. That's related to volume, like compressor, gain, that kind of thing. Then we have time and space, which are some kind of spatial effects related to the stereo field, echoing, reverb, feeling like the mix is inside of a bigger area instead of just being flat and pushed up against your face. And those are kind of like the herbs and spices when you're cooking. And then finally, some mix tools that I love are analyzers, the spectrum analyzer and a phase scope that just give you a visual picture of what's happening with a specific sound so you have a better idea of how to tune in on it with your tools. Finally, I have a rack called the Universal Channel Strip, which you can get for free when you download it from the link. There's an info pack that goes with this video. Look in the YouTube description. There's a link to the Gumroad store where you can download this info pack for free and get my Universal Channel Strip, which I use pretty much on every mix. And it looks like this, and it's got a combination of all these tools in one place. So remember I just said about an order of operations? Well, check this out. These plugins go in a kind of an order that leads me through each sound to clean it up and get it sounding loud and clear in the mix. So in this video, I'm going to show you a couple of problems in tracks, a couple of solutions using the mix tools, and just run through which mix tools you can look for when you're making a track in Live. This might be basic for some people, but it's actually super advanced. Think about it. Audio engineering tools are the same whether you're in a hardware studio with 19-inch rack gear, or if you're looking at a mixing board at a show, or you're getting a new plugin with different labels and things are arranged differently, or in another DAW, or in Ableton, you know, they're going to be the same tools. EQ, compression, reverb, delay, gain, frequency, dynamics, all these things are going to be the same. You're going to have the same problems in all those different kinds of settings. And when you understand the basic mix tools, you will be able to solve those problems in the mix and get a great sounding track no matter where you are working, whether you're in Pro Tools, Logic, FL, Analog, or whatever. So that's what I want everybody to get to, is the ability to flow through any different plugin or workstation and be able to make a tight, solid mix. And of course, we're making electronic music with Ableton Live. So here is a track. The first thing I'm going to do is in this device tray over here, on track 23, I'm just going to pull out the devices or plugins that I want you to think about and use, okay? So auto filter is one super useful track. Channel EQ, I use that sometimes. The main one I use is EQ8. I use that literally in every mix. Glue compressor, gate, regular compressor, limiter, utility, and then spectrum. So right here are basically the mix tools that I reach for when I'm mixing tracks. Frequency and tone, we have auto filter, EQ8, and channel EQ. These are for shaping bass, treble, and the frequency of the mix. We also have EQ3, which is kind of an older one that comes from being a DJ tool. It's like a DJ mixer where you have low, mid, and high. I actually don't use this one unless I'm making a live rig where I want 3 knobs with 3 sounds and they're mapped to the knobs, and that's all it is. I don't use EQ3 very often. Auto filter is fantastic for cutting off part of the sound. You know, it might be fun. I'm going to start dropping these on the master channel and show you what they're going to sound like in case you're super new to this and you don't know. So let's take auto filter. Did you know you can copy and paste plugins? So I did just copy right there, paste. That's a high pass filter, cuts off the low frequencies. Here's the low pass filter, cuts off the high frequencies. And then we can do band pass, lets the middle band pass through, and a notch filter, which is like cutting off a spike in the middle. We'll go much more in depth into actually using these for problem solving in the mix class, which starts next week. But for now, we're just going to run through the devices and get an idea of what they are and when you would use each one. So auto filter, mostly I use that when I want to cut out the low frequency on something that doesn't need to have any lows, like a hi-hat. You would not believe how much hi-hats have low frequency. A lot of times you don't need to even think about EQing it. You just take the frequency knob, put it up to 500 or even 1,000 and get rid of the extra low frequency garbage. Channel EQ is a little bit more subtle. That's for something I would use to just sculpt a sound a little bit with the highs and the mids, and maybe using the low and moving the low around a little bit. That's kind of like a parametric EQ in the lows. I tend to use that one on something like after compression on a drum mix. If I just want to have a little more sparkle on the drums, maybe a little more beef on the bottom and cut the mids just a tiny bit. Channel EQ is like a final polishing EQ, and it's simple, so it's fun to use. And then EQ8 is the one I use the most. Let me do a little copy and paste over to the master channel. How did I get to the master channel so fast? I mapped a key command with this little, up by the tab key on my keyboard, there's like an apostrophe thing. I go into key mapping mode, put that on the title bar of the spectrum analyzer, and then I can quickly flick over to the master channel and see what's happening. Now check it out. EQ8, I double click in this frequency display, and this shows me another spectrum analyzer so I can see what sounds are popping up. And what's even better about the Ableton Spectrum is when I move my mouse on the line, if you look in this little box in the lower left, it shows you what frequencies your mouse is on and even the dB level. So let's say, for example, I can hear that synth that's buzzing. Beep, 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 beep. If I want to cut out that synth and I'm using this EQ8, let's grab a band in the middle, boost it up. I can see that the frequency is popping up right there on that sound, and I can dip it out with a big EQ cut. So EQ8 is a super fun tool to use because you get all these different bands of EQ. You can have like 8 different bands and you can combine them. So for example, in the low EQ, you could have a low shelf. And then on the highs, you could have a high shelf, which is kind of like what we had with EQ3. It just gives you some flexible options to boost up the highs on the whole mix. And let's boost up the lows on the whole mix. This is like what rookie DJs do. They take the high knob and crank it. They take the bass knob and jack it up. They cut the mids out if the vocals are too loud. This is not an EQ curve you would ever want to have on a master channel. But I wanted to just to show you that EQ8 is super fun because it gives you the spectrum analyzer to see where different sounds are popping up and help you tune in your frequencies on those sounds. And then you have a lot of parameters or a lot of options. I mean, you have 8 bands of EQ to use, which is what I mean by a lot. Say hi in the chat if you have any questions. I'm happy to help you understand what we're talking about. And while we're here, grab these settings from my spectrum analyzer. I have these set up specifically so that the line is easy to read and it reacts quickly and it shows you the sounds that are popping up. And just take a screenshot and copy these sounds for the block, channels, refresh, average, graph, scale, and range, especially from 0 to -180. What I like is that the line stays in one place as the sounds are bouncing up and down. And then I can easily, like solo a bass line, for example, see which notes are popping up in the sub bass and have an idea of where I might need to EQ that bass sound. So Spectrum Analyzer is a great mix tool. Keep it on the master channel. and it helps you EQ and kind of find out what frequencies you need to work on. Let's go through dynamics and level. If you saw the video from yesterday, mixed terms, we're always talking about gain, signal flow, and gain staging. In other words, following the level of the signal from the source to the destination, from the beginning of the sound all the way through the plugins to the master channel. And that sound could be a sampler, it could be a synth, it could be something you record from a mic. Whatever it is, you have to know how loud it is at each stage and get it working at the right level. So the tools I use for that are things like utility and compression and sometimes a limiter. And then we have glue compressor. So let's start with utility. I'm gonna make a loop up here on the beat. Okay. Let's go to this sub-bass channel. Got no audio effects on there. I have a little meter over on the left side. I can see it's popping up and it's a pretty loud sound. What if I want to work with that sound a little bit? What would I do? Well, utility is really cool because not only does it let us control the level, maybe I want to take that down -3 so it's not going up too far into the headroom. It's okay if sounds go up loud on the individual channels, but I don't want this taking up so much space in the mix. So for example, I might want to control the gain a little bit and check out utility. It also has this really cool mono switch. I can right away put my sub bass in mono and I don't have to worry about it. Or if I want to keep some of the high frequencies, I can do bass mono from like 150 hertz on down. So utility is really cool. It has some frequency controls it has some stereo controls with the mono switch and then some gain controls, and you can adjust the pan position and do some other fun stuff. So that's one place I would do some gain operations. Now let's say we're going to do some compression on the sub bass. You can see that there's a lot of dynamic range. It's bouncing a lot, but I want to get it just kind of louder. So let's get the threshold just touching the top of those peaks. Get the level bouncing so I can hear it better in the mix. And there's a problem that there's kind of a volume spike. So I'm going to take my limiter, Control C, Control V, take the ceiling down. Now this is kind of an extreme example. I'm doing it quickly on a live video to just show you what the tools are and why I would use them. But the utility is giving me a mono signal of the sub bass because I don't want stereo sub. The compression is making it a little bit less dynamic so I can hear all of the sub instead of having some of the pulses loud and some of the pulses quiet. And then the limiter is solving the problem of that volume spike so it doesn't spike up quite as loud. And the main result is that I can hear the sub bass all the time. All the notes are there. They're not dropping out when they're quiet, and it's loud and clear in the mix. So if you think of every sound, just keeping it loud and clear, cutting off the parts you don't need, getting it present in the mix, that will lead you along the right problem-solving chain with your different plugins. So I'd like to keep this video as short as possible and get you into Ableton Live doing the mixes. But let's look at some other tracks that have problems and ask the question of what is the problem and how can we fix it? So here is a string instrument, right? I'm going to bypass everything on the group that's coming through just to make sure we're only hearing the string instrument. And this is coming from a sample. So it's just a basic sample getting plucked a couple times with some MIDI notes that look like this. So it's playing an interval, just a 2-note chord. And we've got the roar device on there, which is a little bit like a reverb, a little bit like a sound design spatial tool. So we'll leave that alone. And what are the basic problems with this sound? Well, remember when I said that some sounds have a lot of low end that doesn't need to be there for that sound? Let's go over to our spectrum analyzer while this sound is soloed. Double click to make this bigger. I can see the main part of the sound. The important part is over here from about 250 hertz up to maybe 1.7 kilohertz. Again, I'm reading the frequencies in the little box on the left, moving the mouse on the line to see what frequencies are happening. And this is a mid-range pluck. It doesn't need a lot of high frequency, and it definitely doesn't need a lot of bass getting in the way of the mix. So right away in my mix tools, what I want to do is solve a frequency problem and solve a dynamics problem to get it kind of like not as jarring. We'll get to dynamics in a bit. First, let's do frequency. Here we have auto filter, and I want to cut off some of those low frequencies. Easiest way to do it is go too far and then come back. That's too far. I'm cutting off way too much of the mids and lows. Let's roll it back down. Here I can catch the important part of the sound. It sounds a little thin. If I go down to 160, I get most of the body, but that might be a little bit too much lows. Now let's try this. I'm going to take it out of solo, roll the frequency back down, and find the right spot where I can hear the sound without the low end. By the way, filters sound really cool when they're moving. As a sound design tool, moving a filter around is always super fun. I think I'm going to put the cutoff filter frequency around 200 something, because now I can hear the pluck, I can hear the body of it, and I'm not missing anything. You hear the before and after? So what that filter is doing is just getting rid of any unnecessary low frequencies, so we have essentially more space for the bass in the track. And now that it's the frequencies under control, I see it's a very dynamic sound also. It's got a loud attack, and then the body of the sound is not quite as loud. So this is where we're going to dial in some compression to just control those peaks a bit. I want to do a short attack time, short release time. Dial down the compression threshold. Now that's way too much compression. Don't want that much. If you're new at this, it helps to go way too far with your settings and then come back a little bit to something that sounds more normal, so you can get a sense of what's right in the middle. So now I'm going to take my makeup gain and balance out the gain reduction. This meter in the middle of glue compressor shows me I'm doing around 5 or 7 dB of gain reduction. So my makeup gain should be looking for something around 5 dB. Let's drop that back in the mix. I just want to hear the pluck all the time coming through the mix without getting lost. And when I roll in these effects from Roar, this makeup gain is essentially helping me hear the subtle effects better. Just controlling the level, bringing up the quiet parts a little bit louder, getting my dynamics under control. Dynamics, dynamics, dynamics. And then the last thing about this string instrument was I wanted to control the stereo field a little bit. So I thought I would take the width just down so it's not like a fully wide sound. It's like more kind of focused in the middle, because in the mix I was doing some other sounds that were wider. So this is an example of solving 3 different problems in the sound. Number 1, the sound had too much low frequency, so I used a high-pass filter to remove that. Number 2, the sound was too dynamic, too many loud spikes, and I wanted to control those, so I used compression to solve that problem. And number 3, the sound, I didn't want it, the width of it being wider than other stuff in the mix, so I used utility to just take the stereo width down a little bit. That might feel a little more advanced to you, but that's kind of the idea of why I was doing that. Let me know if you have any questions. I'm having a good time going through these mixes, or sounds. And let's just pause here and see where we are. So mix tools are for problem solving. If you don't hear a problem, don't slap on a bunch of plugins, because you're probably going to make the mix worse. Number 2, what are the devices? We looked at sound devices for frequency and for dynamics. The frequency tools are things like auto filter and your EQs, which all take some part of the frequency range and boost or cut. Remember, cut before you boost is the secret to good EQing. Then the dynamics tools are things like utility, compressor, glue compressor, and then gate and limiter. And these are for making the sound louder or making it quieter. And they can take a while to understand compression, because it does both things. It takes gain down with gain reduction. It also adds makeup gain to make things louder. Maybe we can do an example of a gate. So a gate is something that is a noise gate, like the gate closes and you don't hear the sound anymore. Traditionally, a noise gate is for something like cutting out the background noise behind a mic. And I'm going to show you right here. I have a gate on this mic. Check this out. I'm going to turn the gate off. You hear the air conditioner in my basement. It's like an electric buzz. That's background noise. That's a high noise floor. I don't like it. I don't want it in the mic. So, and you can hear me breathing. You don't want that in your mic. You don't hear that in Taylor Swift vocals. You know why? Because they gate her voice and record on a super clean chain. Okay, I'm going to turn the gate back on. Check 1, check 2, check 1, check 2, check 1, check 2, check 1, check 2. And there we go. When I stop talking, it's nice and quiet. And when I talk, the gate opens and you hear the voice. You hear the signal you want. You hear the sound you want. I talked about that yesterday with mixed down terms. Now let's look at what we can do with a gate, maybe possibly on a drum loop track. Ooh, we have a gate happening on this track. Well, that's cool. Ooh, there's the raw sound. That has a lot of problems. Way too much low end. There's a reverb in the kick. It's like almost like a rumble. There's all kinds of stuff in this sound that I don't want in there. So in this channel strip, I can see there's a high pass filter at 275 hertz, cutting out that low. And we have a gate right here. What is that gate doing? Let's run this threshold up. That's with the gate closed. Let's take the noise floor all the way down. Now when I open the gate, I can get the hi-hat and the snare without all that reverb. You hear that? Let me turn this up. Listen to what happens as I close the gate. It chops out the quieter stuff in between the sound and basically dries it up. It's like a reverb removal. And it makes the beat feel more snappy and feel like it pulses with the music better. Let's listen to that. And if I'm gonna really demonstrate that, here's that one beat by itself. I said by itself. I'm gonna roll that gate back down. Is that the beat I want in my track? I mean, it's cool for something else, but I don't want all that reverb clutter. So I'm going to take my gate up. And it dries up that sound. It gives me a short, snappy rhythm where I get the important parts of the drum hits, the transients, the attacks on the hi-hat and the snare. And I don't get all that other washy stuff that's around the sound. And I definitely don't get all that low frequency from the filter. Notice that I use the auto filter first to cut out the low frequencies so that kick drum is not affecting the gate threshold. Then I put the gate on there, and afterwards I can do any kind of compression and EQ if I wanted to. But that's a great example of how a gate helps. Okay, we talked about frequency tools, dynamics tools, gate limiter. Limiter is for controlling spikes on a sound or making a ceiling that the music cannot go louder than. Let's look at a limiter on the master channel, actually, because that's a pretty easy place to have an effective limiter. And we're not doing mastering right now. What I'm going to do is create a problem where the sound is going too loud. That means the master channel is going to start turning red, and we're going to solve that problem with a limiter ceiling. So let's say we got an amateur mix with a low end like this. It's blasting out your master level. If this was a live set, the main sound system would be getting polluted with distortion from the mixing board going into the red. And in Ableton, you actually hear the distortion at the master channel. If your master is turning red, that is distortion you're going to hear. Within the channels over here, the individual tracks, like on track 1, that can go and exceed the peak. And there's like a floating, it's okay for that to happen on individual channels. On the master channel, no. So if you're exporting a track and it's like something that you don't have time to do the full mix, you can put a limiter on there, set the ceiling a little bit below 0, and protect your master channel from getting any peaks. On a sound system, limiters are really helpful because they protect your actual speakers from getting destroyed from a volume spike if someone drops a microphone or has an electric short in their guitar cable or something that would send a very big volume spike into the speakers, into the room, hurt people's ears, make everybody shock, and maybe blow a speaker. You don't want that. So limiters are a functional physical tool. And then for sound design, they're also kind of cool too. So that's a little example of how limiter works. Let's go too far with this. I'm gonna bring the ceiling down and crush it even more. Now that right there is an over compressed mix. It's getting smashed into the limiter. And it kind of can't even thump because everything is just mushed up into a ceiling. It's like taking a banana into a brick wall and going, just getting mush. So let's undo that. In fact, I'm just gonna totally undo that one. Take our mix back down. And kind of rebuild this mix. Let's set the kick drum so it's around -12. Now the master channel is reading about -12. And build the mix up around it. Got the kick drum, got the sub. Let's open up our bass groups. Ooh, that bass feels really loud too. What if we put a limiter on there? That one spike in the bass. Now you can see the limiter is doing gain reduction on those bass spikes. That's a good example of where to use a limiter because it catches the peaks. We're using it in kind of a sound design context. Now I can bring this sound back into the main mix. And get some nice sound. Here's a good technique you might want to copy. Before I bring in a new sound to the mix, I don't want to unmute track 16 with the fader up because I don't know how loud it's going to sound and it might blast my head. So I'd take the fader down, then activate it or unmute, and then slowly fade it up to see how much I need. Okay, so we just looked at an example of how a gate works on that beat loop. We looked at the limiter on the master and then on a bass group. Those are dynamics control tools you can use to cut something out that you don't want with a gate, or put a limit on something that's spiking up, like a plucky bass sound. And for absolute system protection, you can put a limiter on your master channel in a live audio setting, or if you're exporting a mix, like let's say you're exporting a DJ mix and you want to make sure that nothing peaks on the master channel so it doesn't clip, then you can use a limiter for just absolute protection. And when you get to the topic of mastering, you use compression and limiters to control the signal so that if you put it, for example, on a vinyl record, it's not going to make the needle jump out of the groove. Limiting is important. That's another thing that takes some finesse, and the best amount of limiting is when you use a really little bit in the right way, and that takes some time to practice with. So let's move on to the time and space devices. These are things for increasing the sense of width in a mix or feeling like you're inside a space and it's not just a flat, smashed up thing. So let me undo these. Purposely had them in sends only. Now, what do we got? Reverb number 1, hybrid reverb, made for drums, digital drum plate. That's on return A. So I'm gonna look to my drum group. I can see that send knob A is turned up on some of these. So let's unmute these drums. Again, before I unmute, take the level down, unmute my drum group. Got a cymbal crash. And I want to hear this reverb, so let me mute my instruments. Hear that reverb? Thank you, fuzz bass. And reverbs, again, take it all the way down as low as it goes and start to slowly fade it up until you begin to hear the reverb level. And for a drum reverb, it should be kind of in the background. Like if you mute the return, you'll notice it's gone. But when it's in, it doesn't sound like a very big, super wet thing like we heard on the beat loop. So drum reverb should feel just kind of natural and in the background. Let's see what is on reverb return B. That is a spring reverb, the awesome stereo spring. And I believe I put that on a bass sound, right? Check this out. That wet kind of thing. I love spring reverbs. They sound really good on unexpected sounds. So I only have this one bass going on in there. with that spring reverb. Hot little tip, try a spring reverb on your bass lines. And then over here for return C, we have an echo, which is kind of like a long dub delay I'm playing around with on a vocal. That was reverse vocals. Let's get to a place where here in the vocal, go to a sub drop. 1, 2, 3, 4. Bring the vocals up a little bit. It's up on send C, going over to return C. Why am I not hearing that vocal? Going to main, okay. Oh, because that's a little inhale. Yeah. That's a delay. Copies the sound, makes it echo. So it fills up more space and time. Without that, we just have a simple dry vocal. Let's try spring. Sounds kind of metallic, right? The spring reverb. And here's the drum reverb. That drum reverb sounds cool on the vocal. And then return C is our echo. Now if we combine these, for example, that vocal sounds bigger with the reverb A. And some spring reverb. So we just took a flat vocal and made it feel bigger, rounder, like it's in a kind of a chamber, and it has an echo after it, which just kind of pulls it to the front of the mix and makes it feel like a polished, more professional sound. And again, I'm doing this super quickly with some kind of like slap it together effects, but I want to just give you an example that reverb and delay on return tracks allow you to add space and dimension to any sound in the mix and really have a ton of fun. And again, this is another thing that you can automate to just like make your mix totally come alive and move through different phases and transitions, build-ups, peaks and drops, and all the stuff that makes a track sound interesting. Okay, but since I'm talking, I'm gonna mute the vocal. Sorry, Mr. Vocal. And what did we talk about today? It is about 12:30. I wanna keep this short. Thanks for watching. And I'll show you where you can download some of these tools in a second. So mix tools are problem solving. The idea is that you only use an audio effect if you hear a problem that needs to be solved. I'm not talking about sound design. If you want to put OTT on a synth and just crush it and make it all cool, sound design is another whole universe that I love, and I'll be happy to teach more about that later. But when we come to just technical mixing to make your track sound right on a big pair of speakers, you got to solve a couple problems. You got to solve problems with frequency so that the low end is coming through with the kick and sub. You need to solve problems in the mid-range so you can hear your melody and lead and synth and pads and chords and have that all make sense in the mid-range of the track. And then you need to solve problems with dynamics to keep everything bouncing so you feel like the track is alive and the transients are snappy. So they hit like they feel like somebody actually hitting the drums. And that's what makes a track feel loud and clear in the speakers. Of course, also we want some stereo width in there. And that's where basically, you know, simple pan position can do that. I just moved some synths over to one side and some to the other side. The simple tools work the best. We ran through some devices like auto filter, channel EQ, EQ3, EQ8, glue compressor, gate, limiter, and the regular compressor. And then I looked at spectrum analyzer on the master channel. What I want to point out is something called my universal channel strip. This is a rack I built to have all these tools in one place. So when I'm starting a mix, I can drop this one rack on every channel in the mix, leave it bypassed when I'm not using it, and then whatever sounds I need to play with, I can go right through I can go through the rack with the macro knobs and check out what these problems are going to solve. Number one, utility gain. If the track needs more level, I can bring it up. Utility width. If I need a mono, I can mono a bass or something like that. High pass filter. If I need to cut some low sounds out of if I need to cut low frequencies out of some hand claps, snares, hi-hats, a lead synth, a vocal, I got my high pass filter right there on knob 3. Knob 4, gate threshold, like we saw with that beat loop. I can come down and cut out the noise from a drum loop or the breath in between a vocal, or you can get really creative with the gate, actually. It's a super rhythmic device that makes things sound really cool. Next up, we have the compressor. I keep threshold and makeup gain on the macro knobs because those are the controls we use the most. See how that's got a bypass on there? Dial down the threshold, get some gain reduction happening, supply makeup gain to balance it out. Then once you understand more about compression, you can go and touch your ratio, attack time, release time, auto release, peak style, or RMS. There are other parameters in compression that need to be adjusted for the best sound. But going through the rack, after compression, we have our EQ scale. This lets you do a before and after comparison with your EQs. And the way I like to use EQ8 is I double click on the spectrum window to see the frequency display. Then I grab on push, take a band of EQ and turn it on and do the frequency sweep technique. Boost, sweep around to hear where a problem is, tune in on it, check the cue, and cut. Cut before you boost. So EQ comes after compression in this rack. That's another whole debate we can talk about later. And finally, only looking at this rack. Let me get rid of these. Get rid of you, get rid of you. Bye. In this rack, the last step is limiter gain, which is fun to turn up the gain on the limiter and push a sound upwards into the ceiling like I did with that bass sound. I wanted to squish the peaks on that pluck bass, hear more of the bass without having it throw a red spike into my master channel. So this universal channel strip is my main toolkit that I use on pretty much every mix. And actually, this is built on the channel strip from a digital mixing board that I used at a club where I mixed live, like my resident soundman job. And these are the tools you run through all the time. If you have a band every hour and they're switching on stage and you got to plug up a drum kit, a guitar, bass, 3 vocals, a horn, a keyboard, and get the show running in 10 minutes, this is the kind of stuff you need to know how to do. Is you simply ask a question. What is the sound? What are the problems? How do I solve them? And how do I solve them now? Almost by habit, almost without thinking about it. My friend Russell used to say, I could do a kick drum in my sleep because it's the same sound and it always needs the same kind of stuff. So let me go over to the browser and show you where you can get some of this stuff. I have an info pack. There's a link in the description on this video where you can download all these things for free. These are PDF guides and this rack, and you get them on Gumroad. So here's what's included. Mixdown terms you need to know. That's a list of the stuff we talked about yesterday. Things like gain staging, headroom, signal flow, stuff you're going to need to know all the time in mixing. De-influence, where can we get the rack? Check the description under this video. It's on Gumroad. Let me just triple check that description. Yeah, if you click more, like open up the description, click more, it says get the info pack here. And then there's Mixatexture, Gumroad.com, Mix Prep. You're going to get 8 great mix tools, which is a PDF that looks like this. This is kind of like a printed version of today's lecture. I know people don't like to read stuff, but this is a quick run through of what some of these mix tools are, what they do, and why you should use them. And that's not the only thing you're ever going to do in your mix, but it's a basic idea of the recipe for mixing, solving problems, cleaning up frequency and dynamics, and getting a great sounding mix. There's also a VU meters guide where I'm going to explain, that's tomorrow on the live video, I explain what are the meters in Ableton Live. They're not actually VU meters, but people talk about VUs all the time. They talk about gain staging, they get it all messed up. I want this to be simple for you. I want you to understand what you're seeing when you read the meters in Ableton Live so you can end up with a mix that's loud and clear and then get it mastered and played in your sets. And let me make sure I can see the chat. Where did it go? I should do. Yep. And there's a 10-step mixdown guide. We're going to talk about that Friday and Saturday probably. I touched on it today, but the idea is that there is an order of operations for mixing. Kind of goes like this. Number 1, clean up the sounds and solve problems in every individual sound. Number 2, bring them into groups so that you can hear your drums and instruments and vocals or whatever. And then finally, you put them together in the master channel and get a tight, solid mix with a heavy hitting low end, stereo width, nice buttery mid-range, and the correct frequency and dynamics blend. That's all we're doing with mixing. I mean, people made records on a 4-channel mixer with a volume knob and a pan knob. That's like how you can make records. So it doesn't have to be complicated. You can make a great mix only using the stock Ableton plugins. And there are a few simple rules you can follow to get it done. Then also in this info pack, you get the universal channel strip. It works for Live 10, standard, and up. And that is what we have right down here, universal channel strip. Utility, auto filter, gate, compressor, EQ8, and limiter, and that's free. Of course, you could build it yourself, but why not download mine? It has cool colors and the knobs are all mapped. And then also when you sign up for this info pack, you'll get an email every day with a reminder for the next YouTube live stream. So this week is the prep week. I'm teaching the background info on YouTube to get everybody on the same page so that you can understand, what am I talking about if I say gain staging? Where is signal in live? What is signal flow? What are my peak meters showing me? And next week, starting on Monday, that is August 26th, I'm doing a live mix class on Zoom. That's a paid class where people get an Ableton project to download. It's got tracks and racks, audio files and plugins, that we are going to make a mix of music kind of like this, electronic music. We're going to do a 5-day class on Zoom. I'm going to tell you what to do. You're going to make the mix yourself, and you will be amazed at how good you can make it sound in a short time. So by the end of the week, you're going to have a mixdown recipe that you can apply to any music you make, any genre, any style, even if it's live on stage, but it works in the studio with Ableton. And we're doing that on Zoom next week. So this is just the background prep to get everybody up to speed so you're ready for the live mixdown class starting on Monday. And I think this is going to repeat every month because a lot of people want to do it. If you have any questions, now is the time. DInfluence30, I'm glad you love the video. Thanks for commenting. I'm going to press play and just wait a minute to see if any comments pop through because they always take a second. And remember this little trick from today. Before you unmute a sound, pull the volume down and make sure you're not going to blast your head. I learned that the hard way doing live sound is not good. I want to hear that drum fill. What would that sound like with some effects on it? Drum reverb is good. What about delay? What is this fuzz bass sound? This is something that comes in later in the track. I like my music to stay interesting all the time. So I like to put in sounds that only happen in the second half of the track. So after it's been on for like 2 or 3 minutes, you get a whole new sound coming in that gets fresh and makes it interesting. Fuzz bass is like this. And check out what's happening with this auto filter. This is a good example of a mix tool being used for sound design. That's a bandpass filter. And it's moving through frequency and resonance. And I think it's doing something else. Come here. Oh my God. The LFO amount is coming up. Let's just watch this fuzz bass come in again. Check out this auto filter. It's on bandpass mode. Frequency, resonance, and the LFO modulation are all coming in to morph this sound in this section. Meow, meow, meow. I love that sound. And notice how much this compressor is clamping down on the sound. As the resonance goes up and the filter sweep moves, the volume changes a bit in the sound, so compression is a really good way to keep that sound level and even when that whole filter sweep is happening. After that, we have an EQ8. It's like another high-pass filter, just taking out some of the extra bass in that fuzz bass sound. And then a sidechain compressor, ducking the sound so the kick drum comes through. So these are another 3 examples of problem solving after the auto filter does a sound design operation on that. Okay, I don't see any questions coming in. I want to keep this short, so I'm going to wrap it up right now. One more time, hop into the info pack and sign up for free. to get these mixdown guides as well as the rack that I was teaching with today. This stuff is free for you to keep, and I want you to use it, and I want you to read it, learn it, make better mixes in your track, and then message me and share your music so I can hear it, because I want to be psyched about it with you. Oh, here comes the cool part. This is the synth lead. Coming through right there. I have such a good time mixing music. Thanks so much for watching, everybody. I'll see you tomorrow. We'll talk about peak meters, VU meters, and what you need to know about them. All right, that is it for today.